He's ready to go. So Brian Brown is the Integrated Weed Management Specialist for the New York State Integrated Pest Management Program. I know yesterday, every time we said the word weed, we got a lot of excitement. So Brian, take it away.
Great. Can you hear me okay? All right, great. Well, thanks for having me today. I'm excited to talk with this group and excited to get gardening. They just opened up the community garden here in the Ithaca area a couple days ago. So we got out there and seeded some onions and some beets and some peas yesterday. So I'm hoping that those get off to a good start. But today, yeah, so I've got this background in ecologically based weed management, and I'm going to try to use it to help you weed smarter, not harder. And I brought a long list of slides that I can pull from today, and I'm very flexible in how I go over those slides, and I could skip over some and stay a long time on others, depending on your interest. So if you could, at this point, open up the chat and just write in 1 or 2 words as to something's popping up on my screen, as to what are the main topics that you would like to hear covered as part of weed management. There's hand weeding, there's cover cropping, mulching, the biology of the weeds, annuals, perennials. There's so many different topics and different avenues that we cover, and I want to make sure that I'm spending the time most related to what you want to hear. So it looks like we're getting a few responses. Okay, some weeds, people are entering: bindweed, mugwort. Okay, so both perennials. All right, hand weeding. Okay, targeting specific weeds, cover crops, biology of weeds. Foraging, okay, that's interesting. I can provide some resources there. Prevention, lawn pennywort, that's a new one for me. Thistle, horsetail, weeds with runners, identification, dandelion, lesser celandine. So this is, yeah, so I guess.
Oh, Ryan, go out, look in Min's garden. You'll see lesser celandine everywhere right now.
Okay, yeah, so my background is mostly in vegetable systems and farms. So some of these I just don't see in because I'm used to annually tilled systems, but I'll do my best. Okay, winter weeds, ground covers. All right, so that's a good start. I will kind of take all of these into consideration and think about kind of reorganizing my slides or going through them in an altered way. Okay, so I do want to give a bit of a background on weed seeds to start. And this is something that I've done a bit of research on. This is back when I was at the University of Maine doing my PhD. I had about an acre of onions here, and several of these plots I intentionally let get very weedy, and this is one of them here. And you can imagine that the yields in these weedy plots was not nearly as high as the surrounding plots. Due to the weeds competing with the crop. But you know, weeds do provide some ecological benefits. I have to say that the habitat they provide can be really beneficial, and I was surprised to find a cat jump out of this plot one day when I approached it. But you might be able to see here, there's a lot of lamb's quarters, some pigweeds. They're producing thousands of seeds. And unfortunately, this aspect of producing so many seeds really can make life difficult for us gardeners in the coming years. And this is the following year coming back, and that's the same plot there. and there were 10 times as many weeds emerging in those plots than the surrounding plots. So it's kind of a no-brainer, you know, don't let weeds go to seed if you can, but it's harder to do than to say. Most of our summer annual weeds that are problematic in vegetables start going to seed in August. So that's the time when you really want to make sure that that you don't have giant weeds and that they aren't putting on tons of seed. But I do have a question for everyone here. So if you do have a situation like this where you had a disaster last year, how would you go about trying to remove those seeds from your soil? You know, how could you make this situation? You're stuck with this land. You can't just farm in a new place in this scenario. How would you go about trying to get rid of these seeds? And if you could post into the chat there if you have any ideas. How would you remove these seeds from your soil? Okay, a couple answers on cover crops. All right, yeah. Dig and turn under. Shallow tilling, covering with black plastic, good ideas. Till, let them emerge, till again. That's the one I was going for, ding, ding, ding. All right. So yeah, so if you're able to encourage these weeds to germinate, just like is shown in the picture here with thousands of them emerging. If you're able to come through and till or you know, control them somehow before you even plant your crop, creating a so-called stale seed bed, then you've effectively removed all of or a lot of those seeds from your soil. And the other way that seeds, let me flash forward here. Yeah, so get them to germinate. That was the answer I was going for. But there were some other good suggestions there that I'll review later in the talk. So some farmers will do everything they can before planting to encourage weeds to germinate. They'll create a nice seed bed. They'll roll the bed. They'll irrigate. They'll really try to get those weeds to germinate ahead of time. Then they'll come through and till or control them in some other way. And they've effectively removed all of those seeds that would have been a really big problem to deal with in their crop, and a lot harder when you've got the crop in the way. So that's a good tool to use. And the other issue is that weed seeds, a lot of folks think about weed seeds as just lasting forever in their soil, and there's stories about seeds that archaeologists have dug up from thousands of years ago that they've still been viable, kind of horror stories. But for the most part, seeds don't actually live that long. Most of them will die or germinate within the first couple of years. So these pictures of seed banks, or where I've tried to encourage samples of soil to germinate. On the left were a couple of farmers that just kind of do the minimum weeding necessary, usually in the early season, to avoid a yield loss. And then as a result, the later season weeds come in and set seed. So they've got these massive seed banks or seeds reservoirs in their soil. Whereas on the right, these farmers really try to not let weeds set seed and limit the amount of seeds entering their soil. And for the most part, our agricultural weed seeds aren't really wind blown, with a few exceptions. You know, people think of dandelion, and there's a couple others like horseweed or mare's tail. But most of our problem weed seeds, they just fall straight to the ground. So wherever they were produced, they're just going to be right there the next year. And so this is a great visual, just showing this kind of half-life concept or exponential decay in seed viability, that as you as the seeds get older, especially that first year, usually about half of them will die or germinate. So, if you can do a really good job in preventing weed seeds from entering your soil, after 3 or 4 years, you should see a huge difference. And there are farms I visited where you can hardly find a weed because they've done a really good job for a few years, and there's just not many seeds there to emerge. And I have a little video displaying some of these concepts.
Just don't spill the mold, bean hole.
Oh, it didn't start at the right spot, even though I tried it earlier.
Oh, hello there. Make
Here it is.
Most of our garden weeds start setting seed in mid-August.
And most of them have seeds that drop straight to the ground. Weed seeds tend to stay pretty close to the soil surface unless the ground is rototilled. And they usually only germinate if they're in the top 1 or 2 inches of soil. So if you're able to remove those weeds, you're effectively taking those seeds out of the soil. Seeds don't live nearly as long as you think, especially in the top few inches where they're most exposed. So if you're able to keep weeds from going to seed for even just 1 year, you'll really see a big difference. This is a soil sample from a plot where weeds went to seed last year. Compare that to this soil sample from the same farm, but from a plot where no weeds went to seed the year before. I think I'll plant my garden in this plot.
Sorry about the laugh track there. So yeah, gosh, I've noticed I'm really running out of time quickly. So I'm just going to get to a couple things. Folks mentioned different types of mulches, and I'm a big fan of mulches. Just be sure to try to limit the size of your planting hole, otherwise weeds will come through. Wanted to go over some of the different longer term mulches that other than the black plastic, which is probably the most common. I'm a big fan of solarization, which is using clear plastic to superheat the soil and potentially kill weed seeds. So that's another way. And someone mentioned that earlier in the chat, so that's great. And this is most effective if you lay down the clear plastic in midsummer when it's really hot and sunny. Get temperatures up to 120 degrees, several inches deep. And it's really important to bury the edges of the clear plastic and water beforehand or irrigate. Landscape fabric, on the other hand, you can actually use when you have crops in the ground, cutting little holes or burning holes, I've heard works really well through the landscape fabric, so it doesn't fray, and can be reused several years. And it's permeable as well, so you may not have to worry about adding extra irrigation. And silage tarp is kind of a way to press pause. A lot of small scale growers will use the silage tarps if they're at a good point or they want to just kind of keep the ground weed free between crops. But it's also a great way to terminate cover crops, or if you have some established perennials, you could just leave that silage tarp. It's basically just a very thick black plastic mulch. And yeah, so for some of those perennials, mugwort and others, you may have to leave it on for 2 or 3 years, but it's probably a lot less labor than regularly pulling it or regularly mowing it. Hoeing, I do have quite a bit of background in hoeing, so I'm just gonna quickly mention that if you're hoeing, it's really important to get the weeds when they're small, in the cotyledon stage or white thread stage, if you can, when you can barely see them. That's when they're most susceptible to physical disturbance. I'm just going to skip over a few slides. People were interested in cover cropping based on the chat. And a quick note on cover cropping. This is a buckwheat cover crop here, which is a great one for suppressing weeds. It's a really fast growing cover crop. But with any cover crop, there will still be some weeds. See, I poked through here and kind of separated the canopy, and you can see some small pigweeds there. They're not nearly as large as they would be if the ground was bare, because they're having to compete with the cover crop and they're shaded out. But there are weeds there. So it's important, if you have a cover crop, to pay attention to it and make sure that there aren't weeds in the mix going to seed. If you do see them starting to go to seed or flowering, then you need to terminate the cover crop as soon as you can, either through mowing and tillage, or through, well, I guess the tarping would probably take too long. But yeah, I'd say mowing and tillage would be the best way. Other ways to terminate most of our cover crops are just crimping. So you could kind of walk over the cover crop with a board with some slats on it, and that will kind of crimp the stem and should kill most cover crops if they're in the flowering stage. But I think probably mowing and tilling is the most common way and tried and true. And the thing about cover cropping is that when you, and planting in general, is that when you till and you make this nice seed bed, you're also encouraging weeds to germinate. And if it's at the right time, or depending on the time, you're going to get a very different flush of weeds. So this graph shows which weeds tend to germinate over which time periods. And this is for most of our summer annual weeds. And a lot of them are emerging starting about now, through June or so is kind of the big, the primary flush of our summer annuals, but some do go through the summer, and then we kind of switch over to the winter annual weeds. But it's this timing and thinking about, if you're always planting, May 5th, then you're probably going to be encouraging, a certain type of or certain species every year. So thinking about adjusting the timing of when you're planting and rotating between crops or your vegetables and your cover crops to try to switch up the timings of when you're preparing your beds. So weed ID, you all are pretty good at weed ID, I bet. If not, I'll mention some apps here at the end. I've been really impressed with Picture This, which works really well if you just take a photo with your phone, and the weed actually takes up the whole picture. It's not from 40 feet away, and it has a clear background, like against a car or a house or something. Works really well, and it's important to know which weed you're dealing with. And I've got a good example of that. Horseweed and goldenrod get confused all the time, and they look fairly similar. But of course, one is a summer annual, and then goldenrod is a perennial. So they've got very different management implications. So this is just a prime example that it's really important to know which weeds you have, because they all kind of have these kind of strengths and weaknesses, and they all kind of have an Achilles heel. Horseweed, for example, has these really tiny seeds that have to emerge from like the top 1/4 inch of soil. So if you do have a lot of seeds there, you can bury them deep, as someone mentioned in the chat, where they won't emerge. They just don't have the energy stored in that tiny seed to push through more than 1/4 inch of soil. Whereas goldenrod and most perennials, I guess we had mugwort and I think bindweed were mentioned as priorities for people. also perennials with very well-established root systems if they've been growing for a few years. Very different management. So for most of these perennials, it's going to take a few years of really staying on it to deplete that root system. That the root system is where it stores all of its energy and what lets it shoot up really quickly in the spring. And if you were to cut it at the base or to hoe it up, the root system lets it, it can draw from those energy reserves and send up new shoots. And most of our perennial weeds can do this 8 or 10 times, depending on how well established they are, before that energy just gets exhausted, and then finally the winter will actually kill it. So exhausting those energy reserves either by repeated short mowing or repeated hoeing, or by not letting it have access to light through a thick tarp, like a silage tarp or black plastic, are the main non-chemical routes to go. Otherwise, systemic herbicides like glyphosate are going to be very effective at targeting that root system, because they're actually translocated within the plant down into the root. So that's one scenario where systemic herbicides would be something to consider. Otherwise, it's a 2 or 3 year slog. And even with the systemic herbicides, they may take 2 to 3 applications over the course of a few months to really see some big improvement or control there.
Ryan, you are, you're sort of at the end here.
Yeah.
Maybe if you want to, if you're done, or stop sharing and take some more questions, and then we're going to put up the slides for the break.
Yep, that sounds good. I just want to share, this is the Weed IPM program website. And if Deb, if you could share the 2 links I had sent, that would be awesome. One is to the video that I produced primarily for small garden scale production, and several organic weed IPM weed control tips there. And thank you, Gemma. So this is a poll question. I would love it if folks could let me know, as a result of this presentation, how much will your weed management effectiveness improve? And I'm not sure if this is sharing or if it's private. I don't need to share this. This is more just for my information. So I'll just take a screenshot there. But let me see, I might have a minute. Oh, I don't think I have a minute.
Yeah, go ahead, you've got a minute. You started a little bit late.
Okay, well, if there are further questions, I'll stay on for the rest. If people want to enter them into the chat at any time, I'll work my way through those.
So this one's asking about a weed seed chart. Is there a link for that?
I don't know what is meant by a weed seed chart.
Okay, well, we'll see what we can find. And yes, just so people know, we will go back through all the chat and make sure that you get all the links. And also, if there's questions that were asked that weren't answered during the session, we'll try and get those questions asked. As I said, weeds, people are very excited about weeds. And so there's a lot of questions for this talk.